In a bid to curb multiple taxations in the country, President Bola Tinubu in the week signed 4 executive orders, which include the suspension of the 5% excise tax on telecommunication services, as well as the excise duty escalation on locally manufactured products. The president also suspended the 2023 Finance Act, deferring the date of its commencement from 28th May 2023 to 1st September 2023. Now, some of the suspended taxes had been issued through executive orders by former President Muhammadu Buhari in the twilight of his administration. They include corporate income tax, import duties, export duties, excise duties, rents, capital gains tax, personal income tax, value-added tax, stamp duties, property tax, licenses, motor parking fees, motor vehicle fees, withholding tax, and on and on and on, an endless list. There's a land tax, market license fee, road tax, NHIS, a dizzying list of taxes. But I can imagine that Nigerians are saying, thank goodness for that. But for how long really can they say that? Well, to help in the implementation of the new tax reforms, President Bola Tinubu has quickly established a presidential committee on fiscal policy and tax reform headed by a seasoned tax expert from PricewaterhouseCoopers, Taiwo Oyedele. The move by the president has continued to generate reactions, with many questioning the benefits of the palliative tax reform on the Nigerian economy at this time. All right, to help understand the tax issues, we have joining us in the studio an economist of over 25 years experience, Rabiu Hassan. Hassan is also a member of the Arewa Economic Forum. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Yeah.
First, let's establish your thoughts on this, the use of executive order to just, strike off, rather maybe temporarily, by the president, the tax regime that was put in place by former President Muhammadu Buhari in the twilight of his administration. What are your thoughts on this tax suspension?
All right. Thank you very much for having me in this program. I think I have a mix of thoughts.
Right.
Because we have seen through the history of various administrations where a mix of politics is always involved in deciding major economic issues. And I just have to say the actions of President Bola Tinubu immediately sets in was to probably reverse some of those executive decisions, executive orders issued by his predecessor, President Muhammadu Buhari, under circumstances that will suggest clearly that the previous administration was just in a haste to implement those policies, to reform the policies and create those taxes just such that they could have some political scores as having achieved ABC.
Right.
And unfortunately, or fortunately rather, President Bola Tinubu had seen that the speedy, you can imagine some of them were signed some few days to the end of the administration. And that suggests clearly, it's just like the story of the Nigeria Airways, kind of, 8 years into the making, and then just on the May 27th or thereabout, we have a flight in and out, and then Air Nigeria was launched. So this is just the kind of scenario that people are seeing. But however, whether there are significant reasons or substantial reasons to create those executive orders to create escalations in tax, especially at this very critical time, I think these are issues that need to be discussed deeper.
Right, and let's go even deeper. On the let's even take them one by one.
Yeah.
You know, the excise duties escalation on locally manufactured products.
Yeah.
Manufacturers have been welcoming this,
Yeah.
and they're even asking for more. They're
Yeah.
even playing the
Yeah.
Oliver Twist and
Yeah.
saying, look, apart from this, there's still other measures and policies that need to be put in place to make the manufacturing sector, you know, provide a friendlier, environment for the manufacturing sector to thrive.
Yeah.
In your estimation, what are some of those other, you know, policy decisions that this government needs to put in place beyond this temporary, seemingly temporary measures?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a very fundamental question. Now, doing business in Nigeria, like we all know, when you want to rank Nigeria in the global index, doing business index, you would always find us somewhere in the mix of Afghanistan, Pakistan,
Syria.
you know, Syria, and so on and so forth. Now, we are not there because we don't have a very friendly tax environment. The business environment has been so, so destroyed that there is very small incentive, economic incentive for somebody to start new business in Nigeria, especially given the myriad of problems all over the place.
Right.
You know, talking of security, and then over-regulation, and basically dead infrastructure, you know, inefficiency generally in the economy. If it takes you to produce, you know, the cost of energy, these are those things that I think that creates somewhere around 80% of the inefficiencies in our economy, that makes businesses suffer and that makes businesses less productive, that make the economy less optimal in terms of attainments of the general economic objectives of the nation. And so I think the president should first and foremost look at the kind of the business environment as against the just fiscal. The fiscal part of the job is equally needs to be done. But I think they should be done given the plan, the committee that has been set up to actually, these things should be done probably in consideration of the fact that the National Committee or Presidential Committee has been set up to look at comprehensively about the tax and what have you. And we hope and believe sincerity, honesty on the side of the people vested with this responsibility should be able to give us the best and the more fundamental shift in the way our tax system works. But
right, it looks like this committee headed by, Taiwo Udele has its job cut out for it. But what do you think this committee really should be looking at in practical terms that can very, very quickly reflect on the fortunes of Nigeria's private sector, the manufacturers and what have you? Because some are saying, look, it's enlightened self-interest for this government. If it's going to achieve, number one, more jobs and all of that, to support the private sector, that because the private sector, they are the drivers of the economy. What are the things that you expect from this committee?
Now, the first thing I will expect from this committee is, first and foremost, the inefficiency in our tax policy and our tax administration need to be addressed. What I mean by that is, like, we have, you were listing the number of taxes cutting across from the federal to the states. Nigerian businesses and Nigerian households are so constrained by so many sets of regulations, of taxes, levies here and there, and even to a state where there are taxes that you are charged at every point in the taxes that are charged at every point in the production process. That if you add that and then you just oppose the inefficiency of the economy, the bad infrastructure, and that's why we're all crying about inflation. And that we have come to a state where our tax system is not actually serving the best interest of the nation. Because the drive of the tax system is about revenue generation as against growth. Tax as fiscal policy instrument is not just about generating more revenue and more revenue. It is about using that same tax system as an instrument that you can spur growth down and then enhance inclusion and then create opportunities for Nigerians and for the economy to thrive. Now, one of the things that you look at is, the question that comes is, are we overtaxed? I would say yes.
Are we?
We are. Yes, we are. Now, the various tax laws and the codes that we have, I mean, all over the place. When you add up, let me give you a typical example. A pure water producer probably may have to pay taxes and what have you from the center, that is the federal to the state to the local government. Every agency has one form of a tax or another.
Right.
Now, payment of levies and taxes that individuals, the typical businessman will have to probably spend like 30–40% of his capital on making sure he pays for taxes and what have you. Now, this committee should be able to actually review the tax policy that we have, such that emphasis on using our tax policy as a growth instrument should be emphasized in the policy.
But how can that really be achieved, using the tax policy as an instrument of growth?
Okay.
How do you really achieve that?
Okay, let me give you an example.
Right.
Let me give you an example. For example, somewhere in the 90s, 2% tax was created for the education sector. It's the TED fund to finance education tax, 2%. Now, you take a look at this 2%. It represents a very significant amount of money. And this amount of money is taxed on the income of corporates, businesses in Nigeria. Now, the whole of that income has consistently been spent in one particular sector of the economy. But if you do a rigorous analysis, I mean, looking at the quantum of resources that is invested in that particular sector vis-a-vis the quality of the results, you basically look at us still moving around the same cycle. Nigerian graduates, Nigerian university, in fact, the political elites, the business elites, and public servants have actually cornered that particular type of resources and are in kind of a contract jamboree. You go to universities and see departments that are not supposed to exist are being created. You take, I mean, research centers. I mean, I was seeing a Center for Educational Research and Documentation created and funded by TED Fund in a university which was actually established for research and documentation.
Exactly right.
And another center is created for gender relations. You can kind of go around the university system and see the billions and billions of naira spent in the name of, because there is that resources.
So in other words,
now what I'm looking at,
yes.
let me suggest,
yes,
time has come. In developed economies, taxes like these special intervention taxes are given lifespan.
Okay.
Now, that act, it's time for us to review that act. 10%, 2% is big. Why don't we reduce it down to 1%? If you reduce education tax by 1% and give that breathing space for our manufacturers and industry, it will translate into billions and billions of naira that these companies will subject to terms.
Yes, indeed.
Mobilize to expand, create employment opportunities, and do all sort of things.
Absolutely. Well, the tax changes were actually intended, to raise revenue while addressing important public health and environmental concerns. But the question that you are raising is, to what extent really have these taxes reflected in the lives of the average Nigerian and in those institutions where those monies were supposed to be deployed? A lot of argument has been made about the need also to expand the tax net or the tax bracket, that is where the solution lies. But how do you even begin to expand the tax bracket? Where? Is it with for example, FIRS has a plan to introduce VAT, for the informal sector. Will it help in expanding this, tax bracket or tax net, if you like, in a way that will reduce this over taxation of the average Nigerian that you talk about?
Yeah. Now you can expand the tax brackets in two ways.
Right.
Deepening the bracket, as in the FIRS planning to go down to the informal sector. And then you can equally expand it by bringing other institutions or other levels of productivity that are previously not taxed, for example. For example, there are tax incentives for farmers, for example. I mean, you don't tax food and educational and pharmaceutical resources, pharmaceutical products, for example. Now, if you want to expand, broaden you can say, okay, let me bring of the pharmaceutical industry. I think let me bring a segment of the pharmaceutical products. You know, into these you can either deepen or widen, and that's what it entails. Now, like I have said earlier, now, as long as the thrust of our tax policy is about revenue generation, public servants and political office holders will always have reasons to, because that is the easiest thing to do. And I'm saying tax should be for development, not only for revenue. Now, I've just begun to discuss how reducing 1% can even create a tax holiday, let's say 1% for the next 3 years. For all corporations, subject to the fact that you have to account for this rebate that has been done to you.
Some corporations are already getting this tax holiday.
No, tax holidays as incentive for newcomers is already allowed.
Right.
Now, I'm talking about saying, like, for example, 2% of the education tax, reduce 1%. Any corporate organization that have evidence of a project that's going to create employment, that's going to enhance technology, that is going to increase productivity, that is, the main rate of things. You apply and we give you that 1% and you go and use it. Create economic activities that will create more income opportunities for the government.
But then again, this will depend on the level of efficiency in the tax administration.
Yeah.
Isn't that where the challenge is?
Supposedly, that's where the challenge is.
How do you address it at that level?
Now, the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems Nigeria had been confronting from the 80s upwards is that we are not deficient of laws. We are not deficient of rules and codes. What we are deficient of is human beings that will be able to take this and implement them as appropriate. That's what we are deficient of. Now, most of the policies of government and the laws and the codes and the ethics, if you read them word on one, they are very novel documents, well structured. But unfortunately, from administration to administration, from party to party, from public servant to public servants, interpretations and then connivance and then fraud and then corruption and so many things that are traits of human beings will be found in the chain, creating cracks and making the whole of the scheme of things ineffective and inefficient. That's our problem.
How do you improve efficiency?
Now, improving efficiency is the first thing you do to improve efficiency is to, first and foremost, the public service is very critical here because we're talking of government. Is our public service efficient? No, it is not.
Right.
Now, every government that comes will talk about the fact that the public service is over-bloated. Yes, it is over-bloated because there are people that are in public service that don't go to the office and yet they take their pay. Now, if I want an efficient governance, I should have an efficient mechanism. That's the public service. I want to begin to see more executive orders in those those areas where need for improved efficiency are just there and they just need to be implemented. Let me give you an example. The Oresanya panel report that the immediate previous person has spoken about, everybody knows it, know what it is. If that is implemented, don't forget, fiscal policy is not about tax. Fiscal policy is about prudence.
Right.
And about the efficient use of resources. Now, unfortunately, nobody talks about that. Now, if you would reduce the size of the federal public service by half, there will be a lot of political issues around it. Because they would say you that is trying to create jobs, you are killing jobs.
Right.
Now, remember, during the COVID crisis, 60% of all public servants were asked to stay at home for 3 years.
Work from home.
And they worked from home, and things went supposedly well. And
at least not as badly
as bad as it was.
Yeah.
And I want to believe that that should be a pointer to somebody.
Now, there is a strong possibility.
There's a possibility.
Right.
The same thing goes across the board. If you go to states, it's the same. People are only employed because they need to be employed, not that because there's a job for them to do. And it is not that the federal government or the state government do not have those creativity and the resources that will be able to put those same people that will lose their jobs into other productive means.
Right.
For example, if you want to slash the size of public service, make it a productive thing. Everybody that is going will take home with this, will have an opportunity for this training, and then will have access to this capital. I was expecting to see President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, given the theatrical way he had removed, the subsidy. I had thought in the first few days, I would begin to hear things like him giving an administrative order for the central bank to compel banks to make credit available. Do those things that every Nigerian has right, access to finance.
That will be part of the palliative that people are talking about, at least some kind of palliative.
Something like that.
Very quickly, tax reforms are expected to achieve, or hoping to achieve, 18% tax to GDP. Before I let you go, what are your thoughts on this? Realistic target? How realistic, how can this particular target be achieved?
Achieving an 80%.
In 3 years?
In 3 years, it's not possible, it's not realistic. But it's good to have good plans, robust ones. It's not achievable. And of course...
Why do you say so?
Why do I say so? Because taxes can only be generated if the economy is generating enough productivity and incomes that will be taxed.
Right.
Yes. When you now expect to grow tax, you should go around and grow the economy so that you can go around and tax. It's not just like the fact that tax in itself is just about revenue. No. Do those things that will grow the economy so that the gross domestic product, so that incomes will increase, so that corporates will make income, so that we'll export more, and then you go back and tax those excesses.
Right.
It's like a system. You just can't. I've heard
some experts say, look, there seems to be some kind of anomaly where productivity is being taxed instead of consumption.
Exactly.
What do we need to be doing, really, very quickly, to ensure that it's not productivity that's being taxed, but consumption?
I think productivity in this case means when you have an incremental growth in productivity, it creates an incremental growth in income because productivity generates income. Now, it is that income that productivity has generated that will be taxed. Because money is barely
and
a
not
certificate
the ability
of productivity.
To produce itself.
Exactly.
Great. Very quickly, in 30 seconds.
Yes.
What do the manufacturers stand to gain from these tax changes?
Well,
and of course, the consumer, the end consumer.
Well, these are positive. I call them just positive gestures. But the quantum effect of what these will do will not necessarily create any impetus that we're likely going to see in the short term. And what I mean is that most of these escalations that were created have not even begun to be implemented.
Right.
And so it's just like we're going to stay on the status quo until probably the Tax Reform Committee may have finished its job. Because what we have seen here is basically, amendments in the effective dates of implementation and removal of those taxes and what have you. And of course, I think the only one that is of concern to me is the green tax that they have considered. I think we need that. Right, it's very urgent thing that we need to.
How important is that?
Now, you see the volume of our population and the amount of plastic, environmentally unfriendly garbage we generate is so enormous that, for example, let me give you a short example. For example, it will take 440 years for your bottle of water to be degenerated into. If you bury this bottle of water, this plastic bottle of, it could take 440 years underground to be able to degenerate. And now you have probably about 100 million or 200 million people using some of these things on a day-by-day basis. And therefore, in order for government to curb the volume, some tax incentive have to be placed to make it so that it could compel businessmen to look for alternative, environmentally friendly alternatives. And so that is the essence of this tax, and such that it will raise finance to actually be used to take care of these environmental challenges.
Issues.
Yes.
Rabiu Hassan, thank you so much for joining us this week. He's an economist and member of the Arewa Economic Forum.
Thank you very much.
It's been a delight.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right, that's it from me this week. See you again next week.